members of the the rural and Te Tātou Aotearoa boards, no mai haramai. Welcome to the first Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting of the year, today, the 10th of February 2022. We do have, I think, and also, of course, Jeff, to you and your team, we look forward to working with you this year too. I suspect it's going to be a busy year for all of us, still in uncertain times, but however, we have learnt to pivot over the last wee while. We have the press here this morning. Kia ora, Felix, no mai haramai, and also to you as well. Nice to see you two here. So, and we are streaming live, so to those who are watching from afar, welcome to our meeting this morning. Our mobile phones are off, of course, and we'll take a break at some stage, probably around about 11 o'clock, to clear all our messages. So, good morning and welcome again to the first of our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meetings of the year. I'll ask Councillor Tapsell, to open our meeting with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tū taua mai runga, tū taua mai raro, tū taua mai roto, tū taua mai waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tāie.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Any apologies, please, this morning? Yes, Councillor Kai Fong.
Councillor Yates for lateness.
Councillor, thank you. Yates for lateness, thank you. Yes. And no other, thank you. We'll take that. Do I have to put that as? Yeah, we'll need a mover, just for lateness as well. We will need a mover in a second, please, for that we note the Thank you, Councillor Kai Fong. Thank you, Councillor Wing. Sorry, Councillor Wing. I was going to call Councillor Wong again. Thank you. So all those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Declarations of interest this morning. Carl, thank you. Urgent items on the agenda, not on the agenda. No, Carl, Patiko. Thank you. The minutes, Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting minutes of the 2nd of December 2021. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Maxwell. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Are there any corrections or amendments to those minutes, please? Carl. Thank you. So I'll put that motion that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 2nd of December 2021 be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you. Carried. So, agenda item number 6, our staff reports, and we have the first one this morning, the Housing and Business Capacity Assessment, Housing Shortfalls and Housing Bottom Lines. Could I have a mover and a seconder that the report be received, please? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'll put that motion, that the report Housing and Business Capacity Assessment, Housing Shortfalls and Housing Bottom Lines be received. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you. Carried. Morning, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. Nice to see you.
And apologies for lateness.
Thank you. Good morning, JP. Good morning. Morning. Kia ora,
morning, Madam Chair. Just by way of introduction, obviously we gave you the draft report, and certainly in Stella you've seen the 2 technical documents that are produced as part of that housing and business assessment. I'll just hand across to Kate, who will just have there's a few slides just to summarise the next steps for us in introducing and placing the housing bottom lines within the district plan.
Thank you.
And there's a PowerPoint which will come up in a sec. But the purpose of the report is to request that Council adopts the Housing and Business Assessment, which you will have all had circulated earlier in the week. Request that the housing bottom lines are included in the district plan, and let you know that the Council will be informing the Ministry for the Environment that there is a housing shortfall. So Damon did a presentation in November on the HBA. I won't recap on that now, but just highlight the key recommendations. And just as a pre-comment, the HBA, if you haven't read it, it's an incredibly good and robust and thorough report. The executive summary, conclusions and recommendations are really brilliant, clear and easy to read. So if you're stuck, go to those. So overall, the HBA supports the need for an intensification plan change, which you're all aware of. It also recommends the rezoning of Fenton Street to a more intensive mixed-use zoning. It also providing for more infrastructure-served, feasible greenfield land, recommending that we continue to invest in the CBD as an attractive place to live, work and do business. That Council continues to seek funding to help alleviate stormwater constraints, so that's the IAF funding and other potential funding streams. And that Council considers zoning more land for light industrial use, and they've identified, which is in the spatial plan as well, the land to the south of Nongataha. So that's the key recommendations of the HBA, but there's a lot of other data in there that's really robust and brilliant. So two of the key outcomes, or the pieces of information that come out of the HBA are the housing bottom lines and the housing shortfall. So housing bottom lines are the amount of feasible, realistically expected to be realised development capacity that must be enabled to meet demand, and includes a competitive margin of 15% and 20% depending on the time frame. So what market economics has found is in the next 3 years, or out to 2023, we have housing bottom lines that need to be included in the district plan of 3,560 dwellings. In the medium term, so out to 2030, we need an additional 624 dwellings. And in the long term, so out to 2050, just under 10,000 dwellings. So those figures will be included in the district plan and in the RPS, alongside the housing bottom lines for Tauranga and Western Bays. And just a comment there, they're not targets. Housing bottom lines are the minimum amount we need to be enabling. So basically it means we need to do some work on enabling housing, which you all know. It also identifies the housing shortfalls. The shortfalls are there on the right-hand side of the screen. So in the short term, we have a shortfall of just under 2,000 dwellings, 1890. Medium term, that reduces to about 1,400. And in the long term, 3,630. And the long term is out to 2050. And just to note that the short and medium term includes unmet demand or latent demand, which is the figure that Ministry of Housing and Urban Development have identified back in 2019 we've got a shortfall of around about 1,500 to 1,750 houses. So they've included that shortfall of 1,500. Other notes is that the modelling has to be done based on the criteria of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. And so that makes assumptions. So for short term, you can't count any growth unless it's already within the district plan. In relation to infrastructure, the infrastructure needs to be in the ground. In the medium term, you can count proposed plan changes, but that's out to 2030. So in reality, when we do a plan change, that will mean that those figures in the medium term improve. And then the last point is that because there's a housing shortfall and because of the MPS for urban development, we have to do the plan change and we have to consider other options for increasing housing capacity. And that's all work streams that are underway by Council. That's the recap.
Madam Chair, just last couple of points from me too. And for some of you, you've seen those summary slides of the HBA and those conclusions. And really what was heartening for us, and we mentioned it at the presentation back in November, is that it's affirmed and confirmed the significant amount of work we've done for the preceding sort of 5 years. So our original spatial plan and some of the intentions and information that we've done with Ministry of Housing and Urban Development about the place-based assessment and the deficit of homes has all been sort of confirmed through this highly technical and robust report. So for us, it's given us the solidity to be really clear about what we need to do in that intensification plan change, and for us to start thinking about what we need to achieve through the priority development area for the central city and probably into the medium and longer term with some greenfield sites, particularly with a view towards Nongataha.
In relation to, thank you for your presentation. In relation to the bottom point there, what are the other options likely to be for increasing capacity? Have you sorted those? Have you got an idea or a bit clear on what those might be? I mean, we know a plan change, yes, but
So in the report I alluded to the housing work streams that we're currently undertaking, the Plan Our Way Forward, the Build Our Way Forward, the Infrastructure Ready. So as an example, the IAF application for funding for stormwater, that sort of thing all helps. And yeah, there's a lot of little work streams and big work streams within council that are all helping with that.
That would all add up to
exactly.
enabling. Thank you. So we'll take some questions on this one so far. Is that all right? Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you, and thanks for reminding us of the workshop last year too, because this is building now at quite a rate, and the demand is becoming very pressing for us, especially for displaced people to get into housing. When are we going to hear from government? I know we did this mission about being a growth district rather than a region, so that we get our fair share of the pūtea, that, you know, should be announced sometime.
Through you, Madam Chair, Your Worship, is that referring to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund?
Yep.
The information we've had is, I think our last meeting I advised that we'd received, as many councils had, a couple of additional questions through Kāinga Ora, who are undertaking that evaluation. The timetable they had is that decisions would be made and councils notified or developers notified in April.
So is that going to be a restraint for our ability to meet the targets?
I think when we discussed it previously, and the question there was, we've requested something like $100 million across the central and western side of the city to ensure that stormwater capacity is adequate for supporting the level of infill that we're talking about, and supporting development, as well as ensuring we've got responses and resilience built around climate change. That's critical. So if there is a decision where there is less funding allocated to the city, it will cause us significant challenges.
Okay.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for a report, great report. I just have a question just around the long-term estimates, and in terms of that increase of housing we're needing, do you have a feeling for how much of that is addressing our current needs, so for our current population, and how much of that will be due to population growth?
I'm trying to think how to answer that. The modelling base, or part of the modelling, is they look at census data. This is going to be a very simplified explanation. They look at census data, look at our growth projections, and then looking out to 2050, they estimate how many houses we're going to be needing. Yeah, you go.
So that's one aspect of it, and the second part that becomes an overlay, and one of the assumptions they build into it is the changing size or composition. So I think historically there's been that 2.4 people per household. I think over time you start seeing that decreasing, so either more solo families, fewer children, or in an ageing population, more 1 and 2 people households.
Thank you, and I guess the point of my question was really, I just hope we are allowing for population growth. I mean, we have a severe housing shortage now, and we have seen our population growth accelerating faster than predictions all the way.
That's a really important kind of question and statement there, because there is this necessity for us to update this information regularly. And so we often see it with, and the classic is people referring to Stats New Zealand, which tends to backcast and then forwardcast and update their projections every couple of years. Just like council, when we commission people like Infometrics or some of those other agencies, Burls, to do population projections, we make sure we're on a cycle that we can start seeing any changes in the shorter. So generally no more than 3 years. So this document will be updated at some point in the near future. I can't remember what the statutory requirements are. I think it is the 3. So yes, it's important to make sure we keep looking at what is actually happening. That gives you a chance to see whether there's been some sort of macro change in growth projections, and they can be readapted and reprojected.
Councillor Hong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that first slide, which had the recommendations in the HBA. So, and just in terms of the public process, because this is a quick track plan change, so that includes all of those other, as well as putting them in, so that we
by August of this year, we'll have a housing focus. So housing and housing choice is the critical first aspect for us. There's probably some additional work we need to look at: commercial zoning, the appropriateness of any more greenfield lands, and any other sort of zone changes or tweaks to the commercial space. So the plan change we're focusing on for August is about addressing the housing capacity shortfall. So that's our first priority. One of the things we're going to talk about, and we've got a workshop planned with elected members in the next week or so, is because of the importance of getting the housing piece done, we have a community that is also legitimately asking questions. Well, where's the light industrial zones going to go? Where else are things going to go? So we need to be really clear about what comes next after August. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is starting to do our future development strategy, which was another requirement of the National Policy Statement. So the future development strategy is our spatial plan. So we really need to start talking about the next plan and what will be the subsequent actions of, so what are those other plan changes which start addressing some of those other recommendations there. But this initial one is going to be entirely focused on housing and the availability of choice in that housing space.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, JP, and I think it's good that we're actually able to get on and do some of the stuff a lot more quickly now in terms of the plan changes.
Yes, I'm into that. Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair, good morning for the report. I just want some clarity, JP, with regards to some of the key recommendations. One is, when you say rezoning Fenton Street to a more intensive mixed zoning, are we going to decommission some of the motels to allow that to happen in the plan change to become more intensified housing? And the other thing is, when we say providing more infrastructure, feasible greenland, what are we meaning when we're talking about greenland? What public spaces are these to alleviate this housing thing? And my third question is, over here it says in one of the key recommendations and financial constraints that it will be limited to just newspaper advertising, probably to let the public know about this plan change. Will there be no public consultation on this? Because this is a very grave thing with regards to how the public of Rotorua and ratepayers will be affected.
If I can unpackage a few of those. You kind of mentioned the question around greenfield, and I took from your question you're actually querying about reserve land. That's where, my apologies, we keep bringing the traditional jargon of RMA planning and I suppose planning in general. We tend to say greenfield as being additional new land outside an existing urban area. So greenfield is Pukehangi was a greenfield plan change. So it's a case of picking up a piece of rural land and changing its use to residential through a plan change process. So as opposed to infill or redevelopment, which tends to be termed brownfield development. So it's just a bit of jargon that's used in that space. So it makes no reference to reserve changes. But of course, one of the things we've highlighted in our meetings repeatedly is that our green spaces become a unique opportunity for us to manage stormwater and flooding potential. So that's that blue-green corridors. So that's another jargon term where you take your green corridors and they're also there for blue water management down through catchment. So we've talked previously about that's a lot of Stavros's work currently on the catchment management plans. Rezoning around areas like Fenton Street, what you'd get there is you start providing owners with more choices. So if there's more opportunity around redevelopment to a higher and better value, so potentially that may encourage someone to choose to change a motel out to, or demolish it and build some high density housing. But again, that's part of the choice. We can't compel anyone, and of course with all plan changes you also have your existing use rights, so you continue to operate. So it would be more of a case of saying we're adding options rather than closing options. And I'm just trying to think of the last question. Yeah, so this is a technical document. So the insertion of the bottom lines is really a simple notification process. So people can read these documents, which will be posted online, and all the summaries, so they can understand why we have to insert those. As far as the plan change process is moving forward, we've started work around a priority development area for the central area, so involving stakeholders, but it'll be critical for us to move out and start talking more widely to the community about what does the city need to be like for the future. You know, how is it going to serve people who will live here? How is it going to give them the choices of homes and affordability of homes, and the numbers of homes we need as we grow? So it's going to be an important conversation. So you're absolutely correct. We are going to have quite some significant community engagement. We've talked about a housing symposium, but we don't want to be in a situation where we simply put out a highly technical plan change in 5 months' time, without ensuring people understand the why that sits behind what is a technical planning document.
Thank you. And just to add, JP, that the community has been requesting action on housing for quite some time, as we all know. So, Councillor Maxwell.
Thanks for the report. My questions are around some of the rules and that, like last year or so, government urged TLCs to relax some of the rules. And I mean, example, and I think of especially geothermal areas around Waka and Ngāpuna or Hinawatu. Have we, or will we, or does this take into account those relaxations that they're urging TLCs to do? Thank you.
So with any plan change, we'll need to consider what natural hazards could potentially affect the ability for development to occur. Whether that falls within a plan change or within a subsequent plan change, we're starting to do some work around geothermal and around flooding to make sure that those risks are considered alongside enabling housing.
I think just as a summary there, we're starting off with, we're trying to enable more homes. So certainly the discussions we've had with government around the medium density residential standards are very permissive to allow people to develop homes. But within that space, there's obviously then the requirement to consider the constraints that exist on particular sites. So you start off with a view of, hey, we want to enable as many homes as possible across the city and where appropriate, but then you actually start backing away from that to say, actually, there's some physical constraints of flooding areas or geothermal ground or potentials around liquefaction and things like that. So those are all things that sort of reduce the whole picture down slightly. So it's important that assessments are undertaken.
Thank you. And the other question I had was your last bullet point there, zoning more land for light industrial use. I can recall many, many years ago we purchased a property out of there for Kaitu. We held on to it for a while and then we sold it. So are we looking along similar lines or just looking to see if there's land?
My understanding that the team is doing another assessment of so this drills into the requirements around industry growth. So there's some projections being made about the types of industry and business growth, and therefore you get a view of the needs around heavy industrial, medium, light industrial, business type land. So we actually start getting a more accurate picture of the total amount of land of different commercial types we require. And then, of course, there's a question of where do they fit in relation to transport routes and where is the land also appropriate based on hazards and other sort of pictures. So that starts giving us some potential sites which may be considered then for rezoning. So it's a long answer to say it's not as easy as saying, hey, we know it's going to be over there or over there. We cited a few potential sites within the spatial plan that was completed in 2018. So we need to continue to test whether those ones are feasible and potentially meet that composition, and they may be the basis of any future plan changes after this one.
Thank you. Mr Morgan, and then followed by Councillor Donaldson. Thank you.
Thanks. So with the Rotorua Lakes District, we've got a fairly unique situation nationwide where we've got a high proportion of Māori land and we've got a larger than most Māori population. So I'm just wondering what work is happening that's going to ensure we have approaches that are going to facilitate housing on Māori land in a way that's culturally appropriate and located according to iwi and hapu preferences. So the reason I ask this is the conventional solutions being looked at by most cities are not going to meet those needs.
I think there's a number of actions underway, and Gina can probably add to the sort of list that I will say. So there's a number of iwi entities that are looking at their own housing strategies. So we're looking across to see what work they're undertaking and the direction they're proposing to take in views of what they believe should be developed. We're also looking across in this plan change and probably in subsequent plan changes to the direction that was set through the Eastside Wellness Plan. So that was an important piece of work there involving multiple iwi and hapu in setting forward their expectations and the values they wanted to see underpinning that. Through the Te Tato board that you'll be aware of, obviously there's been the work also being done around what does a good holistic community perspective look like, and that's the wellness compass work, and we've also plugged in through them to the Auckland University lecturers who are involved in doing that and also have a perspective of how that fits on an urban development perspective. So we see that as an important opportunity for us to bring some of those values through into things like the design guides as well as specifically aspirations around zoning. So the other part of it, and it goes to the previous question from Councillor Kumar, engagement is really critical. So we've reached out already in talking to a number of mana whānau groups, and this workshop's planned to start talking about what intensification may look like, what kind of values need to be considered, and what those views might be on those areas that need to be considered. So there's multiple threads there, and all are critically important for us to have that input effectively in what is an incredibly short time frame for a plan change. So yeah, lots of work to do in the next 6 months.
Okay, supplementary question. So just in the context of that, I think I'm hearing that as council we're being more responsive than proactive, and I just wonder if there needs to be some consideration of recruiting an expertise that can assist with that that work. And I say that because I don't think many other councils are doing this, and if we're relying entirely on iwi and hapu and Te Tato and others to do that from the outside, there's going to be a time lag because, as I said, it's seeming to be responsive, and so given the time-critical nature of the housing demand, what I'm suggesting is maybe council should be thinking about a strategy to ensure that we're not sort of having a two-step process, rather we're proactively moving some of this forward as well. Kia ora.
Look, I think that's a good question, and I don't have an answer at that, but I think it is an interesting one, and Gina's put her hand up. I was hoping she might respond there. So I think she can answer off better.
Kia ora tātou. I wouldn't frame our response as being our approach as being responsive. It's not for council to determine for mana whenua what is a papakainga or where it should be. It is a collaborative approach that we're trying to foster. So the workshops, which are scheduled from next week, are about sitting with mana whenua. We do have some external support around facilitators coming in, but actually listening to what it is that the aspirations of mana whenua are for the development of their land. It's really important that we do that at the beginning of the planning process. The traditional approach that councils have taken is that they define the problems, the range of solutions, write a plan change, and then take that out for consultation. What we're trying to do is to sit with Te Aroha at the very beginning to define the problems and the aspirations, and then develop a plan change that comes off of what mana whenua have told us directly. We've also approached, which JP sort of referenced, mana whenua groups, to talk about how we might get some steering approach to the development of the plan change, so that we've got a reference group that we can come back to and check in to make sure that how we are interpreting what we were told and how we are implementing that is consistent with what mana whenua are expecting. So that's still a piece of work that we're discussing actively with mana whenua. They have asked for some time to go away and think about it, but that's certainly how we would approach things. And the intention is that because the legislative timeframes are so tight, we need to wrap a lot of support around at the early stages to make sure that the time pressure doesn't impact on the quality of the planning outcomes, and in particular that we don't overlook things in the very beginning stages. In terms of recruitment, my team is we have specifically been working with JP's team around ensuring that there is good engagement, but also I am an RMA practitioner, and I have been for the past 25 years, so I am actively involved in that program.
Thanks, Gina.
Thank you. Jeff, did you want to add a comment to that?
Thank you. Through the chair, if I can make a general comment. I think today the discussion has been about the HBA, Housing Business Assessment. The questions and the discussion are important in that you're talking about moving into actual housing development and how do we encourage that. What this document does, I think, from my perspective, is to provide a conclusive piece of professional evidence that provides a clear baseline as to the housing need in Rotorua. It's an important step forward. It's been part of our housing strategy that you've been aware of, but so far we haven't had this level of conclusive evidence. What we've now got is a very clear direction to say that council needs to respond to the needs of just short of 10,000 homes over the next period of time. So what is our role and how do we do that, I think is a worthy question. The first activity that we need to embark on is making sure there are no barriers to the development of those 10,000 homes. And we can primarily do that in two ways. One, we can remove planning barriers, and that's some of the work that's been going on and about the plan change. Two, we also need to ensure that there are no infrastructure barriers. In other words, when people want to build homes, they can do so knowing that stormwater problems have actually been addressed, knowing that water supply is adequate, and knowing that wastewater supplies are also available to them. Now, just referring back to Dr. Morgan's question around how are we proactive, I think an example would be the joint consent for water supply with Ngāti Rangiwewahi as to how we can work very proactively with mana whenua in the removal of barriers. And I think the organisation has well evidenced its proactive ability to actually work now with mana whenua. I also know that there's a lot of discussion going on in our organisation about how do we become, with regard to water supply, how do we actually take that Ngāti Rangiwewahi model and how do we extend that with other relationships and other hapu groups who also have similar situations with water supply. So that's removing barriers. Beyond that, we need to look at how do we encourage development. Now, that's not about removing barriers, but encouraging development is all about providing guidelines. It's providing policy support frameworks that enable people or gives people more certainty, more understanding about the processes that they need to follow. And things like papakainga policies and development and so on is a good example of that. Beyond that, there's a question mark about, does council get into the development of housing itself? Now, so far, we've been encouraging development and using partnerships through Kainga Order as one type of partnership. But we can obviously go further than that. And a good example of that is the development of housing for older people that we already actually have ourselves at the moment. And there's a question mark about council's appetite to actually invest directly into housing developments for older people. So that's another question for the future. So there's those three areas: removing barriers, encouraging development, and getting into development council itself. What you've now got, I believe, is the confidence to say we're no longer debating about the need for more houses in Rotorua. That debate is over. Yeah. We've now got tangible, professional, comprehensive evidence that points to the need for 10,000 or just short of 10,000 homes in Rotorua in the future. The role of now for this council, and indeed very much for the next council, will be to say, we know this now, how do we now move into those three areas of endeavour, if you like, removing barriers, encouraging development, or development ourselves, to ensure that those houses do in actual fact happen. We know at the moment that we've got a housing crisis. We do know about the topic of homelessness, and it's not too surprising when you start looking at these numbers where there is an immediate need of some 1,500 houses, I think, in the short term. When you've got those sort of shortfalls, it's not surprising that people are having difficulty finding homes. And so it starts giving a whole lot of certainty to understanding the problem that we've got, but also gives certainty to say we need our 30-year infrastructure program now, for example, to respond to this in a way that gives certainty to people who are wanting to develop in the future are able to do so, because infrastructure is no longer a barrier that impedes development.
Thank you, Jeff. And it also just highlights the need for everybody to attend the Housing Forum next week. Now, Councillor Donaldson and then Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā kōrua, JP and Kate. My question is a bit of a process question, and assuming we adopt the housing bottom lines, and I'm certainly supportive, having dug into the HBA, 277 pages, I agree with the Chief Executive. It's a great body of evidence. So while it makes a nod to rural villages, I guess it's the figures for the lines are focused on the city and Ngātaha urban areas. And so my question is on page 14, where the Regional Council needs to include our bottom lines in the regional policy statement. Now, I hark back to the PGF projects where there was a scramble to get our two projects inserted into the Regional Land Transport Plan, and Her Worship raised the issue of Pūtea. So do we need to do this before we're eligible for government Pūtea? And what's the process? What's the status of the regional policy statement of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council? And are we in alignment with their thinking?
It is and the insertion of the housing bottom lines in the district plan and in the RPS is a very simple administrative step. We've been talking to the regional council staff, and it will just be a case of putting those numbers into both documents, advertising it. So from that perspective, it is simple and they're on board.
And probably adding to that too, because of the requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development around notification of intensification plan changes, the Regional Council is acutely aware of certainly 2 large urban areas within the Bay of Plenty that need their support, particularly to look at their bread and butter functions, which is those constraints around flooding and so the Regional Council is working closely with us, as they are with Western Bays and Tauranga, which is the other area which is captured by this requirement around intensification plan changes.
Thank you. And Councillor Tapsell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the intensive work that has gone into preparing this, because it's crucial that we plan well now to ensure a well-functioning Rotorua in future. And the research and evidence in this document sets the foundations for getting that right, so thank you. But when I think about our local families, affordable housing options need to be a priority. So while we've got exciting opportunities in the CBD for apartment living, can you just confirm that there will be that solutions to the housing crisis will also include all of our neighbourhoods, including urban and rural areas?
I think that's part of the future development strategy. So rural is not part of the proposed plan change for August. So again, we're talking about that plan change is focused on the urban area of the city, and that's our first priority. So what that will enable, and again, part of that intensification is really to look at the size of lots. So if we take a view and we start looking across the country, more medium density housing opportunities enable people to build smaller homes on smaller lots or with greater density, and that's a really important for reducing the cost of building and cost of development. They're still very high, but obviously that is the most substantial opportunity to get smaller homes on smaller sites, and that's a critical first step within the urban area. It's also the area, as Jeff mentioned, where actually we have the quickest opportunity to address some of our infrastructural needs to make sure that it is properly enabled, and within the rural environment that will be part of the more longer term strategic part of that future development strategy and potentially subsequent plan changes if required.
Thank you, JP. I am going to start to draw this discussion to a close. Is there any further questions or comments for JP and Kate? Your Worship, thank you.
I do just want to pick up on the questioning of Dr. Kepper Morgan about the aspirations of iwi and assure him that we've been shared the cultural wellbeing compass developed by Auckland University and how we'll put that into a workshop that I do urge councillors to go to, as you mentioned, and we were in discussion at the beginning of the year. The first workshop was with the Chair and CEO of Te Tatau about the housing plan and the aspirations. So it's certainly all woven into this, and I'd like to move 2 and 3.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Kumar, do you have a further?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. JP, just wanting to know that because to facilitate the capacity of this project, will the money be covered through the Housing Development Fund that we have applied for, or will there be a levy put, like a development levy put to impose for any new development to go ahead?
Look, we've signalled over the last 2 long-term plans that we would be looking at reintroducing development contributions, particularly around the Three Waters infrastructure. So that is still the intent. I understand that we've talked again about the timetable potentially for that. Clarity around how much funding we may receive around stormwater is important, because obviously then we won't need to levy that through a development contribution.
Thank you. And I'll take 2 final questions and we'll wrap this session up. Mr. Thomas and then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't actually have a question, it was just a comment, and when the time comes, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep this pretty brief. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the whole team for all the work that you guys are doing. I think this whole plan we're shaping the future of Rotorua, and it's in a positive way. It will have significant impacts on how, and as Councillor Tapsell mentioned, the shape of of Rotorua in the future. And so my first question really was around the short-term, the housing bottom lines for the short-term 2020 to 2023, an additional 3,560 dwellings. We've seen the consents come through for the dwellings, and we are already quite through that 3 years. So how do you feel that we're placed to be able to hit these targets, and what can we do? You know, how does the team feel like, or how does council feel like we're placed to be able to meet these targets? I know it's very ambitious and we'd definitely like to meet them, but in reality, when it comes down to it.
I think we've spoken before, and it's probably good to do it in a public forum. The challenges we have is that we have such a significant deficit, and we have got quite a long way behind on having sufficient homes to meet needs within our community, current community, let alone the growth. So those targets are in the need. It's not even a target. Those homes will be incredibly challenging to achieve. And as a consequence, we really need to know that we're using every potential strategy that is available to try and support that. And the Chief Executive talked about things like that zoning and ability to encourage and partner with others, and the insurance around the infrastructure. We need to be able to support the market to respond. We need to be able to support community housing providers to invest and build homes. We need to keep talking to and encouraging Kāinga Ora and Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to ensure there's sufficient public homes coming into it. So really the opportunity there is huge and really important. I spoke the other night to the property investors group. So even if you move to the mum and dad investors, if we change the rules and allow greater density through the city, the opportunities are there for them to invest in additional dwellings on sites as well. So there is no single magic bullet here. There is a need for every aspect of housing and urban development in our city to move forward strongly, and so really that's why it's been such a significant focus of our LTP, and also the work certainly within the teams to ensure we get as broader understanding of every single lever we can pull to assist in ensuring there's sufficiency in the homes. So yeah, very, very difficult level to reach, and we've talked previously about the headwinds that then come around the corner with increasing interest rates, supply chain issues, and the great search for GIB. So all of those are challenges that create a little bit of a headwind on what is already an incredibly stretching level of homes that are needed in this community. So no single solution, everything needs to work well, and we need to support every opportunity to see homes built.
Thank you. And I guess thank you for mentioning that, because we saw in the report that we were provided earlier the need for 1 2-bedroom dwelling or units, the large need for that, and also biophilic design as well to encompass our natural environment. I think, thank you so much, and I'm very in support of this plan. I think it's exactly what we need to be ambitious, to plan for the future of Rotorua, and for us to take quick, decisive action on it and not cut corners, because we're moving quickly, but we're not cutting corners, and I think that's the really commendable thing for everyone here. So thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff, would you like to make some final remarks?
Just quickly, Councillor Wang's first question I think is an important one, and it's about confidence. I think the key thing from my view is that it is challenging, and it's made challenging by the fact that prior to 2013, the number of new homes being built in Rotorua was quite limited. And in fact, for, it must be 15 years, I suspect now, we haven't seen this sort of growth. And so what we're doing today is actually the first step of providing that baseline evidence to say there is need for development. we're not starting from zero in that for the last 18 months, as you know, we've been working on our housing strategy. And the housing strategy has a number of elements to it now, that this was always going to be the first step to actually ensure that we're actually got a good foundation and we know where we need to get to. And that's what's been achieved today. The next stage is actually our housing forum and really discussing what is the nature of those different work streams that we need to activate now and ensure that they're moving quickly on. Secondly, how do we actually start this broader conversation with the community, with developers, with those wishing to develop Papakainga, with iwi developers as well, to ensure that they are in the loop about where we're going, what are the sort of opportunities that exist going forward. But that next housing forum is an essential forum for that certainty about what are those work streams that we're undertaking. The following step, which I think we're looking at sometime in April, is a broader discussion with the community about what do those work streams look like, what is council doing, what are the things that the community can do, what are the things that developers can do to really get on board and to drive this sort of outcome. I think the bottom line is that council working by itself will never achieve these goals, but council working closely with government, council working closely with the community will make these goals certainly realisable.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for the discussion this morning. It's been very, very fruitful, and I'm sure next Tuesday at the forum we'll be able to get some more information and start really looking into it further. So thank you very much for the work that you've done so far, JP and Kate, thank you. So it has been moved and seconded, moved by the Mayor, seconded by Mr Thomas, that the committee, and I'll read these out, that the committee recommends to Council to adopt the Housing and Business Capacity Assessment Main Plan in Attachment 1 and the Housing and Business Capacity Assessment Technical Report in Attachment 2. And 3, that the committee recommends to Council to approve the inclusion of the housing bottom lines in Attachment 3 into the District Plan. It's been moved and seconded, so I've just read those two recommendations. So I'll... Oh, would you like to have a final comment, Your Worship? As the movie, it's a good discussion. Thank you. Well, I'll put those two then. I've just read them out. So we've had a mover and a seconder. So could I? I'll just move that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much. We're going to move into public excluded now, and there are 4 items for consideration in this session. One is the confidential minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of December 2021. 2, the Polynesian Spa admission charges. 3, contract approval, the development of Taniwha Water Supply Cultural Management Plan. And 4, the contract approval, the preliminary detailed design of the Rotorua Wastewater Treatment Plant upgrade. Now, the reason we're going into confidential is for commercial sensitivity. Could I please have a mover and a seconder that we go into the public excluded session? Thank you, Councillor Yates. Thank you, Councillor Wang. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary. Thank you. Yes, I think we'll just take a 5-minute break. Thank you. I don't think it needs to be any longer than that. Thank you. Just to do the change over there. Thank you.